team. What they don't want to join is the team that's going to get them killed. So I think that the response actually is, in many ways, tampered down jihadis. I mean, there will always be jihadis. There will always be someone with a gripe. There will always be people that want to murder for the sake of murder, and they will latch on to somewhere that gives them that opportunity to do so and feel like they have a cause behind them.
Can I make a quick comment? I mean, Charlie and Matthew have made some remarks that the attacks against Afghanistan and Iraq were successful because there hasn't been a subsequent Islamist attack in America. Of course, there was an Islamist attack in London on 7/7. There hadn't been an Islamist terrorist attack in this country since Lockerbie in 1988. And then as a result of our intervention, there was an Islamist attack. Now, this is not some raving lefty position. The former head of MI5 gave evidence, Dame Elizabeth Manningham Buller gave evidence in 2011 to the Chilcot inquiry, and she said that she had advised Blair's government in 2001 that if you intervene in this adventure in the Middle East, you will make us less safe, not more safe. And she was absolutely right. There was an Islamist attack. This has created terrorism. Terrorism cannot be defeated through bombs, tanks, guns. Terrorism is the product of socioeconomic despair, the consequence of decades of imperialism, colonialism, and the way you stamp it out is a political solution, not by neocon bombs.
But wait a minute, the political solution was part of it. If you'll remember, Bush actually went into this with an agenda, and his agenda was the freedom agenda. You know, the theory that
it was the cowboy agenda. That's what it was.
No, it was the theory that free peoples do not have reason to go to war with other free peoples. He was feeling that you had a people in the Afghanis who were oppressed by the Taliban, and the removal of the Taliban would at least give the Afghanis a chance. Now, it was up to them whether it would be successful or not, but at least they had a chance.
America tries to engage in coups against democratically elected governments all the time.
The Taliban wasn't democratically elected.
Well, Chavez was democratically elected, wasn't he?
In the Middle East, the problem here is where all this terrorism, this Islamic fundamentalist fanaticism is coming from is if you look at the Middle East, it's one of the most undemocratic regions in the world. There are, apart from Israel, there is no real democracy in the region. Saudi Arabia isn't a democracy. Egypt is certainly now not a democracy. All the Gulf states.
Who we support.
The women's rights are appalling. The human rights are appalling.
Yeah, we support that.
Therefore, you have a region which is got terrible governance.
And yet, when the Arab people rose up, against their governments, we did everything we could to destroy that revolution.
That is why the people in the Middle East, in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, are rising up and throwing off their dictators, not the West's rulers. Not the Cameron government, not the Obama administration. It's the Colonel Gaddafi's. It's the other dictators in Egypt, like Mubarak. It is these people, the ordinary Arab civilians, do not have any participation in their government. Who are they fighting in Syria? It is a Arab government. It is an Alawite government. And this is the thing. You go on about the West. Actually, there is more Muslim on Muslim violence. More Muslims kill Muslims in Pakistan than have been killed by the West. Actually, more Muslims have died over the last decade at the hands of fellow Muslims than by the West.
And
therefore, there is a problem in Islam and in the Islamic Muslim world. And there is a clash between modernity, Muslims, Arabs who want a democratic government, who want women's rights, who want gay rights, who want rights for minorities, who want to be part of a democratic process and want their rulers to be elected and held accountable.
Okay.
And then you have the Islamic fanatics who are against democracy, who want a caliphate, who want to rule by Sharia law, as we are seeing.
And they use the oppression argument as a way to further these means. In many regards, you have corrupt government. Let's look at Gaza, for instance, in Hamas. You have a corrupt government there that came to power by throwing people off of buildings. And it's a great way to sit there and find a bogeyman, if you want, in the Israelis, when in fact it's Hamas that have made the problem for the Gazans, it's not the Israelis.
There is a sense with the rise of the Islamic State, and I want to bring you into this, Matthew, again, ISIS or ISIL or IS or whichever you like to call it, have they overtaken Al-Qaeda as the global jihadi brand? And what do you put their success, if we can call it that, down to?
they, of course, emerged out of al-Qaeda in Iraq. And there is one point where I feel I may have some agreement with the person from the Stop the War Coalition, because I personally feel now, actually, we had to deal with Afghanistan, but Iraq, actually, I mean, the way it was handled and has been managed has been nothing short of a catastrophe. And, of course, there weren't very many Islamic fundamentalists operating in Iraq before 2003, because Saddam Hussein was a secular Arab nationalist dictator, and he ran a very, very tight totalitarian ship. He would never, ever have allowed any Islamic insurrection. He would have stamped it out, like in Syria in 1982, what they did there. So this vacuum that opened up after the invasion, when you had every single jihadist from around the world basically trying to pour into Iraq to fight, created, of course, al-Qaeda in Iraq, and now the Islamic State has emerged from that. They have about 17,000 fighters. They are getting a lot of money from the sale of oil in Iraq and Syria, from money that they have stolen in Iraq and Syria.
But do you think that their aspirations are a bit more realistic than al-Qaeda's aspirations, because they are very much a regional group, and that's perhaps what their success lies with?
Well, actually, they're even more dangerous than al-Qaeda, because you see the difference. I mean, al-Qaeda was a loose network, and it was not a threat in comparison to something like the Soviet Union. That was a superpower, and that was a state, and that was a massive machine behind it, a whole nation. However, al-Qaeda was just a terrorist network. And so ISIS is actually now in the process of building the infrastructure of a state, and they have seized quite a lot of territory, and that's what makes them far more dangerous than al-Qaeda, because they are now in the process of actually creating their own state machinery.
Indeed,
even though they are, as Matthew said, a regional entity, the problem, of course, is they do have people with British and American or European passports that are being trained up in jihad that could come back to the United States, United Kingdom, and freelance, if that's the term. I can respect Matthew's point vis-a-vis Iraq. I personally still think it was right to go in, and I think where the mistakes were made, obviously, after the initial battle, that was done very well. If you think about it, I think we had captured Iraq in under 3 weeks. Then you went through a period of confusion, and a lot of mistakes were made in the running of Iraq. However, when Iraq was handed over to the Obama administration after the surge, things were actually better. I mean, even Mr. Obama took credit for that. Where we've messed up, and I think this is what has led to groups like ISIL, was, of course, in not negotiating a status of forces agreement. This is where Mr. Obama really messed up. We did not keep people in the area to protect the blood and treasure that we had lost, to protect what had been gained. I think, again, the way Syria was handled. Now, you can argue whether it was right to set a red line or not, but when the President of the United States sets a red line, he has to respect it. This is the leader of the free world. By not respecting his own red line, sends out a message to the rest of the world, to the ISILs, to the Putins of the world, etc., saying this man is not serious. So this is partly what has led to the situation we're in now.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. We're discussing the position of al-Qaeda 13 years on from the 9/11 attacks. With me in the studio is the American commentator Charlie Wolf. Also here is Samir Dathi, who is a national officer for the Stop the War Coalition. And Matthew Jamison is on the line. He's a consultant fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Samir, is there a moral case to intervene and tackle IS, especially when they're threatening the genocide of the Yazidi sect? They're killing and beheading journalists.
Well, that presupposes that states are moral actors and that foreign policy is a moral enterprise, which I don't think it is. I think foreign policy is
self-interest.
Is amoral. It's not based on morality, which is why the Americans crushed a revolution in Bahrain.
So it's about strategic interest. What's the strategic interest?
The strategic interest in Iraq. Well, I mean, the strategic interest in respect to the Middle East is clear, and everyone knows it. It's absolutely full of oil and resources, and plenty of markets. and the West want to control that very, very important region. This has been the case for the last 100 years since oil became the ascendant commodity.
I appreciate that, but just on the IS point, should Britain, should the coalition of the willing, that term hasn't gone away, unfortunately, go and tackle ISIS?
No, I don't think it should, because there's a simple question. Will it make things better or worse? And I think all you have to do is look at history, and you will see that you cannot get rid of terrorism by bombing. This is so rudimentary. I'm astounded that intelligent men...
Can I ask with all honesty and sincerity, what would you do as far as ISIS is concerned? How would you... say when you see what's happening to the Yazidis, etc.
There are no quick fix answers.
No, I agree to that. But what would you do?
We have to stay out of the Middle East because I believe that our interference in the Middle East is wholly nefarious, wholly corrosive. There is no morality in it.
But meanwhile, whether
we
there
want
is or
to
there
protect
isn't,
our interests.
But whether there is or isn't morality, the fact that the Yazidis are getting murdered left, right, and center, what would you?
More people will die as a result of our intervention, and that's quite simple. Every time you drop a bomb, you recruit more terrorists. I mean, the one few things that Tony Blair did, which was good, was the Good Friday Agreement, where after years and years of Irish terrorism, he sat down and he reached a political settlement. Now that
only came because the Irish or the IRA were in a position where they knew they couldn't win, and they had to switch to a political decision. But what do you do when the other actor does not want to negotiate?
We have to stay out of the Middle East.
Okay,
altogether.
well, can I bring in Matthew again? Because Barack Obama spoke last night. He said he would not hesitate to take action against IS militants in Syria as well as Iraq. So I guess first of all, what's your response to that? I mean, this time he doesn't need the approval of Congress. Is this a good move? He's effectively going to do in Syria what Congress wouldn't let him do last year.
Well, first of all, we don't really know, actually, if Congress would have approved it because it never did get to a vote, so it would be speculation. And secondly, I really feel as though the President, this is the only option he has, really. I mean, I'm deeply disturbed by the moral relativism and the lack of moral clarity on display from your Stop the War Coalition spokesman, because any individual who has a very strong moral compass wouldn't hesitate to say that the Islamic State is an evil, perverse...
Well, I said that at the very outset.
I'm speaking...
Can you stop misrepresenting me?
Okay, go ahead, Matthew.
We need to take action against them. Now, you have said we need to stay away. We need to keep out. We don't do anything. However, other people who watch the television and see children being raped, women being raped,
demagoguery. Is that your argument?
People's heads being hacked off, whole communities being wiped out.
Let's talk about the Israeli crimes. Let's talk about Fallujah 2004. Let's talk about the million Iraqis killed.
Okay, so
you're the one engaged in moral relativism.
Samir, just let Matthew finish.
You whitewash American crimes. You're whitewashing American crimes.
Cannot allow such psychopathic barbarity. It is totally in contradiction to every single civilized human value.
Charlie, just your response to Barack Obama's statement this week, last night. In a way, I mean, I guess you could say he was elected because of... Well, he was in part because he was seen as a non-war president. I mean, there was fervent opposition to the Iraq War. You could argue it's a speech he probably didn't want to make yesterday. No. But you'd be pleased because this is America showing its might and showing that it's doing something.
But unfortunately, it's hard to believe him because actions have to speak louder than words. I mean, some of the positions were major changes from even a week ago. Now he's suddenly all gung-ho. But even then, you don't signal to an enemy what you're not going to do. I don't remember Churchill saying we shall fight them in the air and on the beaches and in the land and in the fields. We shall never put boots on the ground. I wish him well. I think we need to go in. But he talks about a coalition of the willing when he's got 9 members of this coalition so far. Bush went in with, I think it was 37 on the coalition. We don't know what these people are going to contribute. So I am a bit worried, but yes, I think ISIL needs to be taken care of. They need to be excised. They are a cancer, and they need to be gotten rid of.
And how will this go down among Americans? I mean, is the threat of IS quite abstract for them, or did something change with the murder of Steven Sotloff?
That's the interesting thing. Mr. Obama is being led from behind, or leading from behind, in response to the American people. This had nothing necessarily to do with the Yazidis or any of the past events. It's when the polling changed, and the polling changed when we had full